Welcome to Inside American Politics, where we uncover the fascinating, often surprising stories behind America's founding documents. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're diving deep into the dramatic battles, brilliant compromises, and bitter rivalries that shaped the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. These weren't just dusty documents written by perfect founding fathers in peaceful harmony. Oh no, this is a story of political maneuvering, personal vendettas, economic interests, and some of the most consequential debates in human history. So buckle up, because we're about to discover that the birth of American democracy was far messier, more contentious, and infinitely more human than you might imagine. And if this kind of bold, clear-eyed storytelling is your thing, you'll love Skoob, the AI-powered podcast app that turns the world's most important insights into short, bingeable audio experiences. Whether you're into politics, psychology, economics, or the hidden history behind the headlines, Skoob curates podcasts designed to make you smarter, faster. Download Skoob today from the App Store or Play Store and explore a world of knowledge designed to fit your life. Now, let's step into the smoke-filled rooms, fiery debates, and fragile compromises that gave birth to a nation. Let's start in Philadelphia, 1787. Picture this. 55 men gathered in what we now call Independence Hall, facing a question that would determine the fate of a young nation. The issue wasn't just how to fix the Articles of Confederation, it was whether America would survive as 13 separate little countries or become something entirely new, a unified nation. The most significant challenge facing the convention was this fundamental question: would America remain a collection of separate states or become one nation? There was even a third option, originally suggested by Benjamin Franklin back in 1754 with his Albany Plan of Union, a complex blend of both concepts. This central dilemma broke down into specific heated questions. Should Congress be elected directly by the people or chosen by state legislatures? Should representation be based on population, or should all states be equal? Where should ultimate power rest, with the national government or the states? The battle lines were drawn immediately. On one side stood advocates for a strong national government, with states playing secondary roles. On the other side were fierce defenders of state sovereignty, protected under the Articles of Confederation. Remember, the convention was officially called only to revise the Articles, not scrap them entirely. The most radical state rights defenders didn't even show up. Patrick Henry famously declared, "I smell a rat," while Samuel Adams stayed away, fearing they'd encounter a national government instead of a federal union of sovereign states. They were right to be suspicious. The Virginia delegation, led by James Madison and Edmund Randolph, arrived early in Philadelphia and immediately did exactly what the states' rights advocates feared. They proposed abandoning the Articles entirely. They wanted a new constitution establishing a powerful national government with a robust House of Representatives elected directly by the people based on proportional representation. Franklin, historically an advocate for a single, directly elected legislative house, believed this structure would harness the pure democratic will of the people. But the convention quickly deemed this approach too democratic. According to Madison's notes, they agreed without debate, aside from Pennsylvania's likely deference to Dr. Franklin, that the national legislature should have two branches. To give state governments a stake in the new Congress, they created the Senate, inspired by the Roman Senate, with members selected by state legislatures rather than the House. This system lasted until the 17th Amendment in 1913. But the central issue remained: should congressional votes be allocated by population or distributed equally among states? This wasn't just philosophical, it was a power struggle. Smaller states like Delaware and New Jersey feared domination by larger states like Virginia and New York. While this drama unfolded in Philadelphia, one key founding father was conspicuously absent: Thomas Jefferson. His diplomatic duties had him stationed in France as the American minister, watching from afar as his colleagues crafted the nation's governing document. When Jefferson finally reviewed the Constitution's contents, he expressed overall satisfaction, but noted two major concerns that would prove prophetic. His first worry was the absence of any restriction on presidential terms. Jefferson feared that without such limits, a president might accumulate excessive power, potentially becoming tantamount to a monarch, at least in practice. Imagine how different American history might have been if this concern had been addressed from the beginning. His second significant concern was the Constitution's complete lack of a Bill of Rights. Jefferson believed that without explicit protections, ordinary citizens remained vulnerable to potential government abuses. He particularly championed free speech as fundamental, believing it essential to encourage even the most unpopular opinions and allow unconventional ideas to challenge established norms. This wasn't just abstract political theory for Jefferson. Despite his genial nature and reluctance to attack even his fiercest opponents, he famously displayed a bust of his rival Alexander Hamilton at Monticello. Jefferson maintained that skepticism was crucial for responsible citizenship. He often argued that the expense of education paled compared to the costs of ignorance and unchecked governance. Jefferson envisioned something radical, an oath of citizenship where new Americans would pledge to question everything their leaders said. This reflected his core belief in critical thinking and independent judgment. He wanted citizens committed to lifelong learning to make sound decisions. Jefferson even believed the Pledge of Allegiance should focus on the Constitution and Bill of Rights, aligning with presidential oaths of office, rather than merely pledging to flag and nation. Reflecting on the founders, Washington, both Adams brothers, Madison, Monroe, Franklin, and Payne, Jefferson acknowledged their collective excellence as political leaders. These men were well educated, drawing from European Enlightenment principles and deep historical knowledge. They understood human susceptibility to error, weakness, and corruption, articulating ideas eloquently with firm grasp of language. Crucially, they weren't dependent on polls or political careers for guidance. They set their compass by enduring principles, with visions extending beyond political expediency toward long-term strategies, anticipating future needs and challenges. Many, like Jefferson and Franklin, were scientifically minded, striving to guide the nation not just through lawmaking, but by limiting the types of laws that could be enacted. The absence of a Bill of Rights wasn't just Jefferson's concern, it became the primary obstacle to ratification. When George Washington took his oath of office, both North Carolina and Rhode Island remained outside the Union, refusing to accept the Constitution without explicit rights protections. Here's where the story gets interesting. During the Constitutional Convention, Washington himself viewed a Bill of Rights as unnecessary. He believed American citizens would retain all rights not specifically surrendered in the document. During ratifying conventions, he worried that adversaries might exploit calls for amendments to undermine the new political order prematurely. David Humphreys originally drafted Washington's inaugural speech, expressing concern that demands for a Bill of Rights might be a political ploy by anti-federalists. One fragment of this undelivered address questioned whether prudent men shouldn't fully implement the Constitution and witness its effects before making changes that could hinder its proper testing. Meanwhile, James Madison, who would later become synonymous with the Bill of Rights, initially resisted the idea entirely. His transformation came from political necessity when running for Congress in Virginia, a district with strong anti-federalist presence, compelling him to highlight his support for amendments. Madison had communicated to Washington in January 1789 that it was widely and wrongfully believed that he was rigidly attached to every aspect of the Constitution, implying he opposed any amendments. Ironically, the man later renowned for the Bill of Rights was once considered its opponent. During ratification debates, Madison and James Wilson defended the absence of a Bill of Rights with extensive political arguments. They contended such protections were unnecessary because the Constitution only granted the federal government specific enumerated powers. This framework inherently protected freedoms like jury trials, press freedom, and free speech, already safeguarded in state constitutions. Madison even argued that creating a rights list could be dangerous, claiming it was impossible to ensure completeness, potentially leaving important rights unrecognized. Despite these rationalizations, significant numbers of delegates and citizens remained unconvinced. The numbers tell the story. From 124 amendments proposed by 6 states during ratification, the overwhelming majority centered on concerns about federal power, exactly what a Bill of Rights would address. This is where our story takes a dramatic turn, revealing how crucial presidential leadership was in securing our fundamental rights. Madison realized that including a Bill of Rights through the first Congress would counteract calls for a second constitutional convention, which he saw as an attempt to dismantle the original framework. In January 1789, Madison announced his shift, asserting that the Constitution's establishment created new circumstances, allowing proponents to propose essential amendments to improve the document or make it more agreeable to detractors. He believed Congress, rather than a second convention, was the appropriate venue for such revisions, which would strengthen federal authority rather than weaken it. Madison's strategy was brilliant political maneuvering: neutralize Constitution opponents and assure skeptics that their concerns were taken seriously by incorporating their proposed amendments. This would integrate them into the constitutional framework, creating the unity John Jay had envisaged. But Madison faced significant resistance in Congress and desperately needed Washington's endorsement. The breakthrough came in a crucial letter from Washington in May 1789, acknowledging that while some amendments were essential, others were necessary to alleviate concerns of distinguished and well-intentioned individuals. He expressed hope for positive reception in both legislative houses. This letter proved pivotal in overcoming the congressional impasse. Historian Stuart Leibinger notes that without Washington's support, Madison's effort, which became a central constitutional pillar, would likely have failed. Washington's involvement was particularly remarkable because he usually avoided legislative interference. Madison presented Washington with 12 proposed amendments, eventually condensed to the 10 we know as the Bill of Rights. Washington's endorsement transformed political opposition into constitutional protection, demonstrating how individual leadership can shape historical outcomes. Now let's peel back the idealistic veneer and examine the economic interests that truly shaped the Constitution. The Founding Fathers weren't just wise men crafting fair governance. They were distinct groups protecting their privileges while offering just enough rights to maintain support and order. The original Constitution established a system where state legislators elected senators and chose presidential electors, while the president appointed Supreme Court justices. But democracy's challenges in post-revolutionary America weren't just about voting constraints. They ran deeper, rooted in society's division between wealthy and poor. Since some individuals wielded vast wealth and influence, controlling land, finances, newspapers, churches, and education, simply broadening voting rights seemed inadequate to penetrate such entrenched power structures. Representative government itself was inherently conservative, potentially hindering dynamic societal transformations even under inclusive voting systems. During New York's intense ratification debates, anonymous newspaper articles emerged providing insights into the Constitution's nature. These articles, advocating adoption, were authored by Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, collectively becoming the Federalist Papers. In Federalist Paper 10, Madison contended that representative government was essential for maintaining peace amid factional disputes stemming from diverse and unequal property distribution. He noted that property owners and those without property formed distinct interests, identifying the control of factional conflicts from economic inequalities as a key problem. Madison proposed managing minority factions through majority vote, but saw majority factions as more concerning. The Constitution's solution was establishing an extensive republic. A large nation spanning 13 states would make it difficult for any majority group to consolidate overwhelming influence. While Madison's argument appears practical for maintaining peace, it raises questions about government's role. Is government merely an impartial referee between equally matched forces, or does it have vested interests in upholding particular power and wealth distributions, where officials aren't neutral observers but active participants? This interpretation gains traction when considering the framers' economic interests and social backgrounds. Madison clearly indicates in Federalist 10 whose interests he aims to protect, noting that widespread demands for paper money, debt abolition, or equitable property division would be less likely to spread across the entire Union compared to isolated state instances. Speaking of economic interests, let's examine what the Declaration of Independence reveals about who was included and excluded from America's founding promises. The story of the Declaration is far more complex and troubling than the inspiring rhetoric suggests. Thomas Jefferson initially included a paragraph in the Declaration criticizing the British king for participating in and perpetuating the slave trade, and for obstructing colonial legislative efforts to ban this reprehensible trade. This passage reflected Jefferson's moral outrage against slavery, though complicated by the fact that Jefferson himself owned hundreds of slaves until his death. This anti-slavery sentiment highlighted increasing anxiety among Virginians and Southern colonists about the growing enslaved population, 20% of the total demographic, and potential slave revolts. However, the Continental Congress ultimately removed this passage due to internal disagreements among slaveholders about abolishing the slave trade. Consequently, any acknowledgement of black slaves and their plight was excluded from this fundamental document, despite its high ideals of freedom and equality. The Declaration famously proclaims, "All men are created equal," yet this wasn't addressing gender equality either. Women were largely considered irrelevant in political rights discussions, essentially invisible in the political sphere. While women maintained certain practical authorities within households, farms, or occupations like midwifery, they were overlooked regarding political agency. The Declaration's commitments to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness inherently pertained to white males, reflecting 18th-century privileged men's beliefs. It's crucial to recognize these exclusions and consider how the Declaration galvanized particular American groups while disregarding others. The philosophical roots, particularly the notion that government is established by people to secure their rights and should be dismantled if it fails, traced to John Locke's Second Treatise on Government from 1689. Both Locke's treatise and the Declaration addressed governmental structure and political rights, yet neglected prevailing economic inequalities. To truly achieve equal rights, there must be acknowledgement of wealth disparities that fundamentally affect equality. Today, inspirational rhetoric is often similarly employed, masking substantial conflicts and excluding large portions of humanity, just as it did in 1776. Our final segment reveals a fascinating rivalry that shaped how we remember the founding era. The public attention to Thomas Jefferson's authorship of the Declaration didn't emerge from John Trumbull's 1819 painting, but during the political conflicts of the 1790s. As Jefferson faced severe Federalist criticism, his Republican supporters began highlighting his pivotal role in crafting the Declaration. The preamble's emphasis on equality, inalienable rights, and revolution rights particularly interested them, ideas the Federalists found threatening, given their wariness of French Revolution influence. When Federalists attacked Jefferson, Republicans praised the Declaration in newspapers as "our great American charter drawn up by the immortal Jefferson." Federalists tried undermining Jefferson's originality by comparing the Declaration to John Locke's philosophy, arguing Jefferson had merely borrowed from Locke's writings. Despite these efforts, Republican rebuttals highlighting Jefferson's singular achievement remained strong. During Jefferson's presidency, his sole authorship became universally recognized and celebrated. John Adams, who initially regarded drafting the Declaration as less significant compared to his congressional committee work in 1776, grew frustrated by Jefferson's rising acclaim. By 1805, Adams lamented to Benjamin Rush that public perception overshadowed genuine revolutionary work. Adams felt the Declaration's drafting was mostly a theatrical show, a celebrated yet superficial act overshadowing true toil by behind-the-scenes workers like himself. Despite conceding such documents were necessary for rallying domestic and international support, Adams saw Jefferson's authorship as capturing spotlight without substance. He expressed envy over Jefferson's popularity, saying Jefferson captured all the stage glory. In 1709, Adams wrote to William Cunningham asserting he had envisioned American independence long before the Revolution, mentioning a 1755 letter predicting that as America's population grew, its power would eventually surpass the mother country. This early letter was published in 1807 and gained attention. Adams half-seriously referred to it as "my boyish letter," suggesting his own Declaration of Independence predated Jefferson's by 21 years. This playful assertion underscored Adams's complex feelings about recognition Jefferson received compared to his own contributions. The rivalry over celebrated authorship illustrates how historical figures grapple with legacy and recognition in light of public opinion and political narratives. As we conclude this journey through constitutional history, what emerges is a picture far more complex and human than our textbook narratives suggest. The Constitution and Declaration of Independence weren't handed down by perfect sages, but emerged from intense political battles, personal rivalries, economic interests, and profound moral compromises. Jefferson's concerns about presidential power and individual rights proved prescient. Washington's crucial intervention secured the Bill of Rights despite initial resistance. Madison's political maneuvering transformed opposition into constitutional protection. Economic elites shaped founding documents to protect their interests while maintaining popular support. Most soberly, we've seen how the founding excluded vast populations, enslaved people, women, the poor, from the very rights and freedoms the documents proclaimed universal. Yet perhaps there's wisdom in understanding this messy reality. The Constitution wasn't perfect because its creators weren't perfect. It succeeded not because it was flawless, but because it included mechanisms for change, debate, and improvement. Jefferson's vision of questioning everything, Madison's pragmatic political solutions, and Washington's leadership when it mattered most. These human qualities, with all their contradictions, created something remarkable. The Constitution remains a living document precisely because its framers understood their own limitations and built in processes for future generations to expand and perfect the Union they could only begin to establish. Thank you for joining Inside American Politics. If you enjoyed exploring the real stories behind the nation's founding with us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Your support helps us bring more deep dives into the vibrant, ever-evolving landscape of American politics. For more expertly curated podcasts that make history engaging and accessible, check out Skoob, the AI-powered podcast app that delivers the world's most insightful nonfiction in quick, captivating episodes. Download Skoob from the App Store or Play Store and unlock powerful knowledge anytime. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, democracy is always a work in progress.